At the same time, something was happening in Africa, North Africa. There are 4 major river areas, and this is actually not too bad. This is where Victoria Falls are. I was there early this year. And this is definitely complicated. This is jungle, jungle, jungle. And this, in those days, were probably also jungle, jungle, jungle. But this one is kind of nice. Well, it was kind of nice. Now it's overpopulated. But it's kind of nice, you know. It has its own cataracts that separate different regions. And between 2 cataracts, the river flows smoothly. It's very predictable and easy agriculture. Okay. For a long time, it's only now that Egypt is starving because of overpopulation. But for a long time, Egypt was one of the wealthiest regions in the world. Throughout the Roman Empire, was one of the wealthiest regions of the Roman Empire. Plenty of food, very easy, very easy. Historically, 2 regions, Upper and Lower Egypt, developed independently. This is really the delta of the Nile, and it has its own, you know, its own natural, its own landscape and natural thing. And this is more like the river flows smoothly and everything. And there's 2 famous capitals. And if you go to visit, the pyramids are here, and the Valley of the Kings, some of the big temples, Luxor, right here. So that's why the 2 poles of Egypt. Easy river to tame. So flood season is highly predictable, navigable, so different from Mesopotamia. This was easy life. By the way, the Egyptian civilization is one of the longest lasting civilizations ever, because for thousands of years, very little changed. You know, we'll see details, something that changed, but otherwise very little changed. I mean, it was there, it stayed there, it knew very little about the rest of the world, and you know, they had kings that did pretty much always the same things. The surrounding desert also forgot to mention. That desert, the only possible invasion is here or the sea. But back then, nobody had the navy to invade. And from here, they did have trouble every now and then, but it was mostly Egypt causing trouble down south, actually. So, you know, almost paradise. Today is very hot. I'm not sure if it was that hot back then. It might have been really paradise also in terms of temperature. So 3000 BC, because these dates are not accurate, you know that, right? I don't need to say that, we're not sure about that. The dates are always plus or minus. You know. This king unites Upper and Lower Egypt. This was a big thing. It was such a big thing that we have a record. That's why we know. Okay? This king unites both Upper and Lower, so that then really it becomes one place. That's why we know. That's the main document. It's a famous. If you go to the to Cairo, to the museum, this whole room that tells you about the details of this. So we know exactly who did it and when and so on. And it was a big thing for them. So they remember that was a big thing. We normally divide the history of Egypt in 3 sections: Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. And I could have one slide and just tell you, you know, one summary, because again, this is a civilization that changed very little, relatively very little, over 3,000 years. One of the big differences is that initially only the king is eternal. Okay, that's why the pyramid and everything, just kind of mind-boggling. I think I have a slide that tells you the amount of resources that went into building the tomb of the king. It was an entire economy. One of the main, I mean, today we complain when the state spends too much money on public projects. Like, the moment I become king in Egypt, I start employing thousands of people to build my tomb. And that becomes one of the main economic drivers of the nation. Okay? It's my moment. Totally different from Sumeria. Okay? This is really the afterlife here becomes a big thing. But in the Old Kingdom, for the king and the queen. Okay? Royalty. Only royalty has to worry about eternal life. Yeah, I'm sure you heard about the sun cult. You know, there's deities, more than one, that are associated with the sun, and one of them is, you know, represented with that little circle on the head. And the king is the sun with the sun. In English, it doesn't sound right. It's the sun's son. And temples to the sun and so on. So Egypt is a worship of the sun. Not surprisingly, given that they don't have jungle and they have the sun all day long, you know, in every season. But definitely the one thing you notice about this civilization, compared with all the others, not only compared with Mesopotamia, is the obsession with the afterlife. Again, at this point in time, it's really about the royalty, the king, okay? Everything, the entire economy of the state, this is what I was saying, the entire economy of the state revolves around the preparation of the king's afterlife. This is mind-boggling. I mean, the amount of material and just the size of those tombs and all the decorations inside imply that thousands of people were working at it. So it was a major economy. And indirectly, you go all the way to the quarries, all the way to the transportation of those materials. You know, you probably know that the pyramids are built of material that were not in that place, they were somewhere else. The pyramids were probably built in places where they thought they would never be found. That was before the invention of cars and before the invention of the smartphone. And in fact, which palaces can you visit in Egypt? Palaces were probably built of very very poor materials. Palaces, I'm sure they were comfortable for the king, but they were not a big thing. So they spent a lot more time, money, and brain in the tomb than in their own palace, in the place where they lived. So it tells you their idea was that, correctly, that life is this. The afterlife is this. Okay? And the best furniture we found in Egypt, by far, is the one we found in the tombs. By far. I mean, jewelry, Tutankhamun treasure. You heard of it, right? It's, you know, iron was rare in Egypt. We found it, I think, all in tombs. And mummies, you know about mummies. That's a way to preserve the person. So there's a whole long story about what that was for them. You know, that was not the end. That was the beginning of something very big. And that's the kind, so this is actually later in time, but anyway, that's monumental. It's monumental stuff. You know, this is Karnak, look at the pillars. So that's what I was saying. Up to 70,000 workers per pyramid. In a nation that had 1 million people, 70,000 is almost 10% of population working on just building the burial place of the king. That's it. It's like Obama taking, what, 10, 20 million people to build this tomb. I don't think it would go down easily in Congress.
Well, I don't know, the House might support building the tomb, but that's
so, you know, so that drove the whole economy. And so there's different places where these things happen. So if you visit Egypt, you will probably, maybe you will not go to Abydos because that's really for specialists, but you will go to Memphis, Thebes, and yeah, you will see, what you will see is the places where these burials were done. The pyramids are most famous, but not the only ones. If you haven't been there, the value of the kings is not pyramids, it's caves, basically. But those caves are huge, and they have the best decoration. They have the best, you know, writing and pictures and. Okay, so this is Valley of the Kings. This is caves. Yeah, this is some of the caves. That's illegal picture. Italian tourists in Egypt taking pictures. The only one is not completely out of. They caught me once a long time ago, and they threatened to confiscate the camera. Luckily, with a little bribe, I got away with it. So monumental civilization, but for the purpose of the of the immortality of the king. And why? Because the king is the intermediary between gods and humans, is the son of the sun. And it's not a warrior, by the way. That's a good point. The king is not a warrior in Egypt because they didn't have invasions for a long time, major invasions. So war for them, the old kingdom had few enemies, had no standing army. So the king's job was administration, was not leading, protecting the country or leading into conquest. They had very little knowledge, in the old kingdom they had very little knowledge of the rest of the world. We have no evidence, we have no maps, we have no evidence that the Egyptians knew what was going on in Mesopotamia. It was just, relatively peaceful, wealthy civilization.
What was the population compared to Mesopotamia?
I don't know population of Mesopotamia. Ancient Egypt, about 1 million. Population of Mesopotamia, I think it's hard to estimate because it's city-states. So at that time, I think it's difficult to estimate. I'm sure somebody has made estimates, but I think Egypt is easier. These bureaucratic empires usually have records, and we can estimate very easily. In the case of the Roman Empire, they tell us, they count it. When you have a society fragmented in city-states, I think it's hard to estimate. And my guess would be similar density, just because, but yeah, I don't know, speculate. And gods, it's hard to tell. Of course, there's one case where one god under one king became the main god, and people say there was the first case of monotheism. But other than one special case, generally speaking, gods were really, to me, they were more like characters in a cartoon. They were just stories, and very strange stories and very complicated stories. And the most popular was Isis and Osiris. Osiris died and then became the lord of the underworld. And he was supposed to have some supernatural powers. But again, when there's legends about gods, depends which text you read, because the variations can be dramatic. But ultimately, it's just stories. It's really just stories. It's not performing miracles, and it's not giving particular wisdom. It's just stories. So it could be that originally these were a king and a queen, and then their story became a legend. And the funny thing about the Egyptians, of course, is that each, with rare exceptions, there's 3 or 4 exceptions, they are animals. The scarab, the cat, the snake, that's how you recognize them. If you memorize the association with the animal, you can recognize it, right? So these are the exceptions. These are, and one is one of the oldest deities, maybe the first one, again, female. And in this case, this is very easy to recognize. Usually it's on the ceiling, on the lid of the door, and it's exactly in this shape, and sort of cosmic figure. But these ones, for me, they are harder to recognize. Somebody doesn't tell me, it's harder for me to know who this is. So that could be one reason why they're animals. Make it easy even for children to identify. Oh, you're talking about that guy, as opposed to. I don't want to do this. Okay, so the language here moves to this hieroglyphic system, 700 signs expressed in different phonetic combinations. So you have a combination of the pictographic that you had also in Mesopotamia at that time, but you also have the beginning of the alphabetic character. There's something that is sort of proto-alphabet. And again, when you see that thing, usually means they're trying to express abstract concepts. In fact, they are. Because, for example, what we today call the mind, which the Greeks already had a number of names. In the case of the Egyptians, usually it's translated as soul, but there's actually different concepts of the soul. Ba and ka, 2 different things. And I get extremely confused, so I will not get into it. But the thing that is supposed to become immortal of the king, there's at least 6 different components, and I'll let you Google and read the details. So they are also trying to express these abstract concepts, and then the pictures are not enough. Then you need more. Again, irrigation was one reason that created the society. Of course, a good question is why Egypt didn't have the city-states? Egypt is born with these 2 kingdoms, and then there's a king that unites the 2, and that's it. Well, we don't know. Maybe there was, a situation of city-states that we just don't have a record. But it's still a society founded on, indirectly founded on irrigation. Egyptian women. Okay, if you want to know about women, they can become the rulers. In fact, there's at least two queens. At least 2 queens. Some of the names, I'm not sure that we really know if the name was female or male. Women could own land and run business, or even when they were not the ruler, they were both the wife and the sister of the incest was common in the royalty in Egypt. So they were both the sister and the wife of the king. So their power was certified 2 ways. So they could divorce, and so I mean, for those days, this was not a bad place to be. Compared with what comes later, Greece, this was a much better place for women actually. We see that Greece was incredibly sexist, at least Athens.
Were they just not as concerned about paternal uncertainty and?
Good question. Yeah, good question. I don't know. Some literature, the most important literature, I guess, comes later, this story. But there's something also important here in literature. So then something happens during some other periods. The Middle Kingdom is a little different. And one thing that happens is that Osiris, which I mentioned briefly, the god that ends up in the underworld, that replaces the sun god, and that promises eternal life to everybody. Now, to me, that has always been the biggest thing that happened in Egyptian civilization. There's a moment where see, what is mind-boggling about the Old Kingdom, how could those 70,000 people work for the tomb of the king? In a place where they tell you, you are going to die and that's it, and he's going to live forever. Right? And this sounds so unfair. Well, somehow they believed it and they did it. We're not aware of any major revolution in the Old Kingdom. This makes more sense, right? This makes sense. Now, the religion says everybody can have an eternal life. There's actually a moment which is widely represented in the tombs where this other god, Anubis, is weighing the soul of the dead person and decides if you go this way or not, okay? If you get eternal life or not. That seems to make more sense, right? Everybody has a chance. The king, just because he's a king, automatically admitted. But we also get a chance. So that's a major change in my opinion. That means that ordinary people start thinking. They start thinking about themselves. I don't want to die. Okay? So to me, that's a major change that happens. That's the way. This is the soul. Anubis, master of ceremonies. This is the soul. Somebody died, and there's the scales are topped by mud, weathering. So that's the whole ritual. And this other god is ready to destroy the deceased, to show his heart's sins weigh more than the feather of truth. Okay. So, but the bottom line is now immortality is not an exclusive of the king, which is almost like a transition from tyranny to democracy. Not really. Don't take it literally, but fiction. So the most important thing from fiction, I think, is this one: epic novel about the picaresque and exotic adventures. Exotic. Repeat. Foreign word. of a servant, not of a king. Gilgamesh was a king. This is just servant. He leaves Egypt, becomes powerful, and then he returns to. So from the point of view of literature, this is a major change in the scope of narratives, and talks about other places, not the Nile. And that's, you will see that there's a political reason for that. And the philosophy, we have a lot of texts. The most famous, the Book of the Dead, and in my opinion, it's boring. It's a boring reading, actually. But these are really philosophy. Okay, they're not very long, but these are philosophical things, philosophical discussions. So you get the feeling that by the Middle Kingdom, we're talking 1,000 plus years after the beginning of the Old Kingdom. In Egypt, actually, yeah, this was the same society, it was the same kingdom, but the way people thought was changing. Those are always the intriguing things that are not documented because there's no war, battle, whatever. But you can sense that something was changing in the society. So what happens at this time is a major invasion. The Hyksos, which we know nothing about, we just speculate, they invade the delta. These are 40 people invading Egypt. It's the first major invasion of Egypt by somebody else. It's the first time that the Egyptians had to see a foreigner coming to their house, okay, and presumably killing, somebody.
Was there not trade going on at this time?
Yes, there was.
Oh, okay.
So that's how they knew the exotic thing, because they knew.
Right.
Yeah. But Egypt did not rely on trade for its economy. There was some trade. Yeah. There was some navigation, and famously we found out we deciphered the Egyptian language when we found there was a stone, right, that has the 3 languages. We know Greek. We know what was the other one, another Greek form, and then we know the Egyptian one. And then we don't know the Egyptian one, we find out why somebody built that thing. Well, there was a dictionary. It was a way, somebody knew both languages, so by definition there was some kind of interaction. The later you go in Egyptian civilization, the more trade you have. The earlier in Egyptian civilization, the less trade you have. Egypt was self-sufficient for food and so forth. So the Hyksos are invaders, that's different. They bring the foreign world into Egypt. It's not just one trader going somewhere and coming back and telling stories. This is, you see a foreigner in your house. And then you have the New Kingdom, I don't know particularly what to say. This is the age of the Valley of the Kings, so instead of building pyramids, they build the tombs in caves. You can speculate why. My easy explanation is that pyramids are easy to loot, to find out and loot, even in the age before the smartphone. You can see them. And the caves, by definition, should be safer. In fact, Tutankhamen, we found his tomb when? 20th century. So it took 1,000 years to find it. Again, they're still monumental. I should have pictures of Abu Simbel, those 4 giant, colossal things compared with the tourists, still colossal. So everything I said is still true, still monumental religion, and the tombs extremely sophisticated. So, Old Kingdom, age of the pyramids, New Kingdom, age of the temples. Now we also have temples. We also have not only the caves, but the temples outside Dendera, these kind of things. They're just temples. In fact, some of these temples will become the first cathedrals of the Christians, by the way. So the architecture of the Christian cathedral is pretty much copied from the architecture of the later Egyptian temples. Yeah, and there's probably a transition because the temple is not about the king, it's about the nation. So there's probably a transition to the idea that you want the whole nation to be immortal. Because before that, it's hard to find any sign of patriotism. It's hard to find anybody who says, oh, I'm an Egyptian, or just something about Egypt, But the temple is more like that. It's a symbol for the whole community / a state. And in ancient times, the pyramid was just the king. It's just a tribute to the king. It's the king's house for the rest of eternity. So even that, there's there's some kind of change in the way people think. And this is Tutankhamun's treasure. So that gives an idea of what they buried in the tombs. So what I said about the Old Kingdom still applies. You know, an incredible amount of work went into these things. Some of them jewels, and it was for what? For the tomb of the king. This is another tomb. These pictures are legal. You can take pictures in this tomb, and you can see that the amount of work again that went into the decoration of the tomb. Then eventually the foreign world goes both ways. I mean, they had the invasion, and here, this is 3-4 centuries later. Egypt has expanded, so they went to conquest, and just about where Israel and Lebanon are today, they meet another great civilization, the Hittite Empire. They ruled over what today is Turkey. And there's a famous battle, the Battle of Kadesh, probably the most famous battle of the ancient Western world, where these two mighty empires fought. So on both sides we have representations of this battle. Who won? Typical battle between two big empires, probably lots of people dead, and who won? Nobody.